This is the story of George Jenkins Jr., who grew up in a farming family in the rural South at the start of the 20th century in a time of economic hardship. He started his business during the Great Depression. By the time George passed away at the age of 88, his company was the largest employee-owned company in the U.S. Publix Supermarkets currently has approximately 230,000 employees across multiple states. This is the story of George Jenkins, founder of Publix Supermarkets. On a warm September day in 1907, Warm Springs, Georgia, George Jenkins Jr. was born. Visitors were drawn to Warm Springs to enjoy the naturally buoyant water that flowed year-round from the springs on the north side of Pine Mountain, at a steady 88 degrees. George's father, George W. Jenkins Sr., owned a general store in Harris City, Georgia. Bad news for the people of Harris City and George's family. The boll weevil beetle hits the area's largest crop, cotton. It devastates the whole industry. George's father is forced to move the family and business to Atlanta just to survive. George Jr. is only 16 years old and stays behind in Harris City to help close down operations. At this time, George wanted his independence from the family business. His dream was to go to Georgia Tech and study electrical engineering. Since he needed money for college, he got a slew of different jobs at his young age. Jobs he tried included a cab driver, which he quit on the first day after getting stiffed for a fare, selling shoes, which was way too slow, selling candy bars on consignment, which nobody purchased. In 1924, he also moved to Atlanta and enrolled at Georgia Tech, going to classes at night and working days. He began work at a Piggly Wiggly store, and after 8 weeks was sent to replace a manager who was recovering from an illness. From that point on, his job was temporary manager at all the owner's stores. After 4 months, George was not convinced that the grocery business would become his vocation, so he accepted a job selling real estate. He sold one house, collecting a substantial commission. However, his boss was convinced that a fortune could be made in the South Florida land boom. They made plans for the trip, but the wife of his boss refused to go, so George went by himself. George hitched a ride with an acquaintance and was dropped off in the middle of Ybor City, Florida, with nothing more than a change of clothes and $9 in his pocket. In luck, he was able to get in contact with a friend in the area and was invited to spend the week with him and his wife. The plan was to soon hitchhike back to Atlanta since his Florida real estate dream had turned out to be a bust. But days before leaving Florida, he met the owner of a few Piggly Wiggly food stores in town. George was persuaded to stay and work for him to make the money he needed for school before heading back. So in June of 1925, the Publix founder started as a broom pusher and store clerk again. Within a few weeks, George was practically running the store. His boss was so impressed that he was promoted to manager in their St. Petersburg store. At the St. Petersburg store, George has always worked tirelessly to keep the store sparkling clean and well-stocked. In less than 1 year, sales more than doubled. The company owners were so impressed in George that he was transferred to the company's largest store in Winter Haven, which he managed for 4 years. Due to the Wall Street crash and other issues such as numerous hurricanes, George's owners had to sell their Piggly Wigglies to a businessman in Atlanta. Since the new owner would not visit Florida, George drove up to Atlanta to introduce himself and discuss some important ideas he had for the business in Florida. At the man's office, his secretary told him that he was too busy dealing with critical business issues, even though George heard him on the phone discussing his golf game. On the long drive back to Winter Haven, George came up with a plan. He was going to open up his own store to compete directly with this arrogant bastard. So, in 1930, during the Great Depression, George opened up Publix right next door to his old Piggly Wiggly in Winter Haven. He incorporated using all of his savings, $1,300, and raised another $1,200 from his assistant manager, butcher, and 4 other friends. The first year was tough. The owner of the Piggly Wiggly brought in a hotshot from Miami to knock George's Publix out of business. It was a battle as both stores fought for customers. After a year, the Piggly Wiggly closed down. George had won this battle. George was ready for his next challenge. With the economy picking up, within 5 years, he was ready to open up his second store on the other side of Winter Haven. In another ingenious move, during the Depression, George purchased an orange grove when real estate was at its absolute lowest price. In 1940, with the improved economy, he was able to use his orange grove as collateral to secure a $70,000 bank loan to build the store of his dreams. This was no longer a store, this was a supermarket, the first in Florida. Features that other stores could not provide, such as open dairy cases, interior air conditioning, automatic sliding doors, wide aisles, music playing in the store background. None of these things had been done before. From the 1940s through the 1990s, George met many challenges. He always continued to expand throughout Florida and starting in the 1990s to other states. By the mid-1990s, George's Publix supermarkets had over 500 locations. George's employees were always known as associates. All employees are granted capital stock and share in the store's profits. George passed away in 1996. From the time he was a little boy, he had worked endlessly. His life was also a constant string of obstacles. George Jenkins is a great example that in life there will always be obstacles. Never let them hold you back. Just work through them and stay positive.